Ever get to the end of a week, or a month, or even a whole year and just wonder where all that time went? It's this strange, slippery feeling, right? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into the science behind your brain's internal clock and figure it out.
I mean, it's a feeling we all know. Remember when summer vacations felt like they lasted forever? Now they're just gone in a flash. It really does feel like the years are just speeding up the older we get. So, what is really going on here?
Okay, so the secret isn't on your watch or your calendar. Nope, it's all happening inside your head. It turns out your perception of time is really just a story your brain is telling itself. And let's be honest, it's a pretty wild story. So let's get into the first chapter. Why does our own personal timeline feel like it's accelerating? All right, first up, we're going to look at a scientific model that really helps explain why life feels like it's constantly stuck on fast forward. So this whole idea comes from a field called psychophysics. Now that sounds super technical, I know, but the basic idea is pretty simple. It's all about how we perceive things. Think about it like this. If you lift a 1-pound weight and then a 2-pound weight, that difference feels huge, right? But the difference between a 50-pound weight and a 51-pound one, you'd barely notice it. The theory is our brain kind of treats time the exact same way. And this all boils down to a really cool concept called just noticeable differences. Check this out. For a 1-year-old, a single year is 100% of their entire life so far. It's this massive, massive chunk of their existence. But for a 50-year-old, 1 year is just a tiny 2% addition to their life. It's a much smaller slice of the pie, so it just feels shorter. And on top of that, you've got this other huge factor, novelty. I mean, think back to when you were young. Everything was new, right? Your first day of school, your first crush, your first job. Your brain was working overtime, creating all these rich, unique memories. And that makes time feel like it's stretched out. But as we get older, life gets, well, more routine. There are fewer firsts, which means our brain has fewer unique things to latch onto. And that's when the days and years just start to blur together.
Okay, so this graph here from the Time in a Bottle study really shows us what this looks like visually. See how steep that line is in the beginning? That's our early years. Each year feels incredibly long, just packed with change. But then, as we get older, you can see the curve starts to flatten out. That means it takes more and more actual time to pass for it to feel as significant as just one of those early years did.
You know, researchers actually have a name for this shift. They call it the inversion point. And it tends to happen somewhere between the ages of 20 and 30, right around when we hit what you'd call mental maturity. This is the exact moment when our sensitivity to these new chunks of time starts to dip. The curve plateaus, and suddenly time feels like it's moving way, way faster. Okay, but wait a second. That brings up a really interesting question, doesn't it? If the recent years are all just a blur, why are our memories from our late teens and early 20s so incredibly vivid and strong? What gives? Well, that leads us right into our next big idea.
The answer is something amazing called the reminiscence bump.
So the reminiscence bump is one of the most solid, proven findings in all of memory research. It's pretty wild. Basically, when you ask people over 40 to talk about their lives, they remember a ton of stuff from when they were between about 10 and 30 years old. It's like a literal bump on the graph of their life's memories. So, the big question is, why does this happen? Well, scientists have 4 main ideas. First, there's just all the novelty. So many first experiences happening. Second is our cognitive abilities. Our brains are basically at their peak performance for learning and remembering things. Third is what they call the cultural life script. We're hitting all those major milestones our culture expects, like graduation or a first job. But the one that really seems to have the most evidence behind it, it's all about our identity.
Yeah, this quote really hits the nail on the head. The things that happen to us during our teens and 20s are vital to the development of the individual's adult identity. I mean, think about it. These aren't just random memories we're pulling up. They are literally the building blocks of who we are. They're the core of our life story.
Okay, so we get it. The past feels like it's speeding up, and our youth stands out like this bright, shining anchor. But what about the here and now? What about the present moment? Is there anything we can actually do to slow things down, to make right now feel longer, richer, and more meaningful? It turns out there might be. A fascinating study looked into this very question. Here's what they did. First, they got a baseline reading for how a group of people perceive time. Then, they split them up. For just 10 minutes, one group listened to a regular audiobook. The other group, they listened to a guided mindfulness meditation, just focusing on their breath. And after that, they tested everyone's perception of time again. And the results? They were pretty remarkable. The group that just listened to the audiobook, no change at all. But the group that did the mindfulness meditation, they consistently felt that more time had passed than actually had. For them, after just 10 minutes of that exercise, time subjectively felt like it was passing more slowly. So why did that happen? Well, the researchers think it's because mindfulness actually boosts our attentional resources. Basically, by really focusing on the present moment, like the feeling of breathing in and out, you're dedicating more brain power to processing what's happening right now. And that deeper processing creates a much richer, more detailed memory of that moment, which in turn makes it feel longer. Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together. What does all of this whole story about time, actually mean for you and me? All right, here's the recap. First, we've got the lifespan model. That's why time feels like it's speeding up as we get older, thanks to less novelty and that shifting scale. Then, we have the reminiscence bump, which is the anchor. That's why our youth is so vivid in our memory. But here's the real kicker, the most powerful part. We're not just passengers on this ride. We have a tool. We now know that through focused attention, like mindfulness, we can actually make the present moment feel longer and richer. So this leaves all of us with a really powerful question to think about. Knowing that you can actually influence your own perception of time, how will you choose to experience your moments? Look, time might feel like it's always slipping away, but our experience of it doesn't have to be passive. We have the power to pay closer attention, to break out of our routines, and to really engage with the now. The clock is always going to tick at the same speed, sure, but the richness of our experience, well, that's entirely up to us.